It was a great nation that settled on a giant island. Its lands were rich in every need, its people lived in prosperity all the time, and in the middle of the island there was a palace revealing the whole city, and the island had a plain. It is said that it is more beautiful than all the plains. Near it, there was a hill in which there was a hill that was watered, and around it, the hill, there were two rings, land and hills, water rings, and the city had a wall of gold to prevent the entry of strangers. The faces of the city are present, palaces, temples and buildings covered with silver, and its columns with gold, and the palaces of its goods, covered with ivory, and decorated with gold, silver and copper, and in it are a cold spring and a hot spring that grows profusely and never stands, and on the outer rings there were harbors for ships surrounded by residential areas that come alive for the day, and all this under the warm sun of the day. The island was ruled by 10 kings who met every 5 years to consult on matters of governance and justice. Canoe they ruled the central island with their own. The Tanya Islands also advanced their armies to the east and seized the north of the continent of Africa to the border of Egypt. They headed south and took over southern Europe to Greece. Atlantis was living a life in obscene riches and great luxury, but in a day and a night destruction fell upon them. They all drowned and the island disappeared and its story ended. But before we start, if you are not new to the channel, do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell so that our videos reach you firsthand. What I said, the introduction, was part of the description that Plato told about the island of Atlantis, which was mentioned for the first time by the philosopher and the Greek mathematician Plato in 2 famous dialogues called Metama and Critias. Plato recounted that he was his teacher Socrates, met 3 people, Timaeus, from the Greek city of Locri, Hermocurtis from the city of Syracusa located on the island of Sicily, and Critias from the city of Athens. He asked them to talk about the relations between the ancient city of Athens and the countries that were in the world at the time. Critias told that his grandfather met the Athenian poet, Solon, and Solon told him that he visited the priests in Egypt once, and the priests of Egypt told him about a great island called Atlantis, the greatest civilization known to mankind in terms of technology, science, architecture, engineering and astronomy, and described to him the city accurately. Description like Eli we said in the introduction, and according to the priest's description of what corruption spread in Atlantis, the rulers of the city decided that they were conquering the whole world. Athens confronted them and overcame them, and after the battle a very strange need occurred. Atlantis began to show violent natural phenomena, which, as they described them, called the wrath of the gods. Volcanoes exploded, earthquakes and floods drowned the coasts, and tsunami waves reached the heart of the city, which caused the destruction of the city and drowned it completely with all its treasures and all its secrets. So far, the only physical evidence in the hands of humans regarding the subject of Atlantis is Plato's writings and the words that he told, and for this reason the researchers were divided into 2 teams, a team in favor and an opposition team, a team that confirms that Atlantis in fact, and our fate will be delivered one day, and another team says, "O group of Atlantis, this is just a story. Plato told it, a legend that is not more but what remains if the first team is the one who has a right." And Atlantis was really a reality one day, so if Atlantis existed in its place, would it be where? The first possible place is the sunken Atlantis, and Eli is considered the most famous place at all is the depths of the Atlantic Ocean, and this stems from the words of Plato himself. Plato in his conversation, he said a text that Atlantis is located in the ocean behind the columns of Hercules, and the columns of Hercules is a Greek description of the area of the Strait of Gibraltar, and the one that separates the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Sea. Far from the story of Atlantis, researchers from time ago speculate that in the past there were huge pieces of land in the heart of the Atlantic Ocean, which were considered a link between the big 3 continents, Africa, Europe and America, and the reason for this is that there is a strange similarity in the ancient civilizations that existed on the coasts of the 3 continents, countries with the same astronomical knowledge, the same religious beliefs, and even similarity in their huge buildings and structures, although it separates them from some 1 million kilometers of water in the ocean. And some animals and plants are even found in places that are considered their natural habitats, unless they are limited to being moved from their original place to another place. Since it has a vast distance of water separating these continents from each other, it was one of the logical explanations. In the recent past, there were huge pieces of land in the Atlantic Ocean, and it was the link between the continents of the Old World, but for some reason this piece of dry land has disappeared. Come and put this talk in Plato's description of the area of Atlantis. Plato says that the area of Atlantis is not just a small city and salvation, but that it was a whole continent that existed and disappeared, and because of this, many people say that there is certainly no other place to remove a continent in its condition except the Atlantic Ocean, and that Atlantis is certainly the missing continent in the Atlantic Ocean. Its area is very large. We are talking about 106 million square kilometers. Is there a specific place in the Atlantic that Atlantis is expected to be there? The truth is in more than one place, and one of the most important places is the volcanic Azores Islands, 1,450 kilometers from the coast of Portugal. There are 9 volcanic islands known as the Azores. They were discovered for the first time in the modern era by the Portuguese in 1427, but the journey Portugal when he reached the islands de la Couche any humans at all, the entire islands were uninhabited. But what is surprising is that they found monuments and sculptures found on the islands, the remains of temple-like buildings and the remains of residential structures that are thousands of years old. And what we still do not know until today is the belonging of any people, nor any civilization, and for this a group of researchers came out and said that this is definitely the place where Atlantis was, and because of the natural phenomenon that happened, there are only 9 small islands left of them. On the other hand, we will find other hypotheses linking Atlantis to the Bermuda Triangle, specifically that Atlantis is located under the triangle. Plato in his conversation, he said earthquakes and floods sank the island of Atlantis in the depths of the sea, and for this reason the sea in these parts is not navigable and transitable, meaning he says that there is a huge mass of land sunk under the sea. The area was empty and turbulent, and it is difficult for anyone to infect it, and some people came out and said that this description is going to start perfectly exactly on the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle has a huge area ranging from 1.3 million square kilometers to 3.9 million square kilometers. The navigational conditions in the region are very difficult, in addition to this that the triangle is located in the Atlantic Ocean, and therefore it is possible that Atlantis is indeed under the triangle area. But there are other people who said that the electric crystals and lasers that the people of Atlantis used to generate the remaining energy are still there until now, and they are the cause of the disturbances that occur to the devices when a plane or ship is away from the Bermuda area. Under the Bermuda area, the water is over, although this hypothesis is, of course, the most interesting hypothesis, there is no evidence of its validity. The Bermuda area has many expeditions, submarines, satellites and every need. We even found that there are ships and planes with very ordinary encroachments from the Bermuda area, which do not meet any problems, and in other areas of the ocean that are dozens of times more dangerous than the Bermuda area. The whole point is that the media has paid attention to the Bermuda Triangle, which is why the area is very famous for treating people, but there is no need to prove that affection has anything to do with Atlantis. In 3600 BC, 200 kilometers southeast of Greece, there was an island called Sarah known today as the island of Santorini. It dates back to the days of the Bronze Age, a people who were very wealthy, and it was about them that they were the first civilization in Europe. Written language was used. They were distinguished in the construction of roads and palaces. They had advanced technologies, and all the Greek civilization had missed at that time. But suddenly, in a day and a night, a huge volcano erupted on the island, and it was accompanied by a strong earthquake and a tsunami that led to and completely destroyed the island, and the Minoan civilization ended from its real more than 10 million tons of rocks, ash and gas, spread in the atmosphere. In fact, it is described as the largest volcanic event in the history of the Earth. The strange recorded scenario in the subject. The scenario that happened with the island of Sarah is somewhat similar to Plato's story about Atlantis, given the proximity of the island of Syra to Greek territory. This led many researchers to believe that Atlantis was just a projection by Plato on the island of Syra, but from a Greek perspective. What is more surprising is that the researchers found on the island has drawings and murals similar to Plato's description of Atlantis, rings of land separated by streams or lakes of water. Researchers say, this hypothesis is that Atlantis could be located deep in Africa, in one of the locations where it is very difficult to imagine Atlantis existing. That it is Mauritania, in an area in the state of Mauritania called the Eye of the Desert. This area has overlapping circles, separated by a depression or a neat similar to empty water channels. It was thought in the past that it occurred due to the collision of a meteorite, or that it is the place of an inert volcano, but when the researchers filmed it with satellite, they discovered that it is very similar to Plato's description of Atlantis, especially since the size of the roundabouts is very huge, up to about 35 kilometers, and for this reason the researchers asked the question of whether Atlantis is possible to be on land inside Mauritania. Especially since Mauritania is close to the Strait of Gibraltar, and whose columns are Hercules. I mean, it is considered behind the columns of Hercules as Plato described, which means that if we want all this to be in the wrong place. Of course, singles are very long and talking about them needs episodes to unit. In some opinions, it says that Atlantis could be Egypt, especially since in the past there was a city called Heracleion that was located in the Gulf of Abu Qir, in Alexandria. This city was adopted in the days of the Greeks and was characterized by the name of a temple built for Hercules and built in it a huge collection of columns and other Roman monuments and sculptures. But this city sank into the sea and its ruins still exist. Until today, there is a witness on this subject that there are opinions that say that the columns of Hercules mentioned in Plato's account are not the Strait of Gibraltar and there is no need, but the columns of the city of Herculean that existed on the coast of Alexandria. Since Egypt was located at the time behind the columns of Hercules, we can consider Egypt to be Atlantis. Although this topic is completely unlikely, the hypothesis authors say that the priests who told the story to Solon were from Egypt, and they told Solon that the armies of Atlantis advanced to the borders of Egypt, and they wanted to occupy Egypt, and therefore it is very clear from the novel that Egypt was present in its current locations, and it was known by its name, and Atlantis was located in another place, and that the two of course are not one need. Finally, the last expected location of Atlantis remained, which could be more important. A site in all of them. It is Plato's brain. Atlantis is very likely, it is just a myth or a fictional story. Plato knitted it to work with it to project philosophical meanings and ideas. Like the idea of the perfect city. The triumph of spiritual power was represented in Athens. On the equipment, sophistication and richness represented by Atlantis. That's why we don't have it at the moment, but we prefer to put Atlantis in the realm of myth until a new discovery appears that proves otherwise. Do not forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to receive everything new.